Hey everyone, welcome to another week of More Than You Asked For. A little bit of JavaScript and a whole lot of talking and other things with me, Kyle Shevlin, your host extraordinaire. The man with the plan, man of the hour, that kind of thing. Oops, that didn't mean to go there. You get a little brief moment of recursive streaming software going on there. So I'll give it a few minutes, let some people show up. No sense in teaching things to people who aren't there, but yeah, I'm excited to be back. I hope everyone had a happy Halloween, and I hope it was like really good time for you and your families and your friends. I dressed up as Bob Ross. I got an afro wig, and yeah, we had a little celebration with some friends. So as I'm sure many of you did, yeah, it'd be pretty cool if you told me what costumes you wore in the chat tonight. That would be kind of fun to share with everybody. Tonight, I think we're going to. What my game plan is we're gonna cover Redux. We're gonna go through learning all its basics, and I'll do my best to handle questions as we go along. And yeah, I mean, I just Redux was one of those things I found pretty early on when I was learning React, and it just became really helpful. And in fact, I think it shaped a lot of the way I look at certain patterns and that sort of thing in general. So I think it's a really helpful tool for a lot of people, and I think it can be really helpful to you doing state management in your React applications. You're going to have to forgive me for a second. I'm pulling up my channel on Twitch to see if things are working correctly, because I don't see anyone joining just yet. It does appear that things are working correctly, so that makes me feel good. That makes me feel better. And I did just put out the word on Twitter, so we'll see what happens. Yeah, so I guess as a recap of what was going on last week, last week we covered making container and presentational components. Basically, we talked about these two types of components, these two ways of handling concerns, as a way to structure our applications so that we could separate basically controlling logic from view logic. And this pattern becomes really useful to us as we use state management in our applications. So to recap what was last week, I didn't do anything special here other than just make some components. I didn't make any extra directories. Maybe tonight we'll do that. But let's start here. As a recap, we were building a GitHub profile. We hit the GitHub API. I hit the API myself. We can actually go do that real quick in the browser and see the JSON response that we would get. I have a Chrome extension that'll give me pretty printed JSON responses, so it's pretty nice. But yeah, we took this output, and you can see it here. We got our response, and we set the state based on the response, and then we actually returned the repos URL, and we went and fetched those too. So we did two fetches, and we waited for all that to finish, and you could see that set state gets updated. We update it once with our first response. That way the first request comes in and we immediately update some of the state. And then here we do it again, except we use the function signature in both set states to get them to go into a queue rather than be objects and get smashed together, because we'd lose some of the data along the way, possibly. So we use the function signature, and we return our new data objects based on the previous state and some of the things we're getting in. And yeah, we end up with repos being set to like their full name. And down here a little lower, the container component is responsible for fetching and accumulating the data, and then it kind of can be the point of entry to decide what components to render based on that information. It's not about presentation. It's about deciding, like, with the given state that we have, what do we want the user to see at this moment. When we don't have any data, like here, if we have data, I want you to show the presentational component, the GitHub data. And if we don't have any data, we want to show that loading spinner to people. And so what you end up with is, if I come back and I refresh the page real quick, you'll see briefly loading, and then as the network requests come down and we get the responses, they fill into the presentational component, which, let's show you the presentational component real quick. We're going to pull up the GitHub profile. And if you're wondering where you can get these, hey, some people are in the chat. Nice to see you, Cole. Hope you're doing well. I hope everything's going really well in San Francisco and at PayPal for you, man. I have no clue what that emoji is. Is it fire coming out of a hand, like some kind of sorcerer? That's man. Emoji games, these, like, people's emoji game is on point these days. I can't keep up with it, man. It's like modern day hieroglyphics. Yeah, this is the presentational component that we have. It's very simple. We just get a data object. You can look down here at the shape of what we were getting. We're just getting a bunch of strings. And, we're just doing some basic stuff here, like a URL to my name, so you can actually go to my profile, some login, some bio, and we're just doing a list of the repos. And yeah, we end up with this, right? And that works really nice. Yeah, I'm trying to. I had a thought in my head and I totally lost it. Oh well, it happens. No big deal. So that's kind of what we studied last week. We studied container components and presentational components. You're too old for Twitch. I'm pretty sure you're younger than me, Cole. Um, at least you're better looking. I mean, I don't know if you're younger, but you certainly look younger than me. It's all good though. All right. So, that's what I was thinking. Okay, if you're new to the stream, I want you to show I want to show you the repo that you can follow along with, and it's called React 101, and we're just doing really super basic stuff. This is a very beginner-friendly stream. If you're really new to React, I'm really hoping that what I can do is provide you with some good information to get started, some good patterns to begin exploring React, and hopefully set you on a good path, because it can be really tough to find people to give you guidance. I know the interwebs are full of really great tutorials and resources. I hope you find great tutorials and resources. But this is my little corner of me trying to help y'all do React, and this is the repo you can get to right here. GitHub.com/Kyle Shevlin. That's me. React 101. And you can kind of see. I keep showing people as you go through the commits. Like, we can look at this commit. This is basically what we did last week. We added Axios to do our data fetching. I just really like Axios. You could totally use fetch. And this shows, like, we added the GitHub container to our app. And I try and leave really nice comments each week so that you kind of get an understanding of like what was going on. And you can just check the differences week to week. So what I thought we'd start off doing today was we'll take these components, we'll organize them a little bit better, and we're going to actually redo this in a Redux fashion. And as we go through it, we'll cover everything that happens in Redux. We'll cover doing how we want to store action types. We'll cover action creators, which are functions that create actions, really well named. We'll cover reducers, and we'll also try covering like testing a little bit. And I think we'll also cover some Redux thunk as a way to handle asynchronous state updates. And we'll just try and cover all the other things that we kind of hit along the way. So at any time you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. I've got the chat down here in my laptop screen, and I'll do my best to keep up with y'all and answer your questions. I'll be a little preemptive. I might not know the answer to all your questions, especially if you want to compare different state management systems, but I will do my best. And remember, I'm trying to do this for beginners, so if it gets a little advanced, that's fine. But I might just come back a step each time as I explain. So let's get into it. Let's do some. Let's get into the code this week. All right, I'm going to start by removing the comments from my files, and I really only added comments to the 3 main files we added. Those of you following along with the repo will notice I had to make an in-between commit in there where, so in React 16, a lot of things kind of changed with, well, specifically the diffing algorithm. You've probably heard of React Fiber. I'm not going to go into too many details with it, but it changed how Jest and Enzyme work together for testing. So I had to spend some time getting the repo up to par again, and I didn't want to bore you with those steps. And so if you follow the commit history, you will see one where I updated the tests and the snapshots, and we'll cover just tests tonight because we're not really going to cover too many components. We'll cover snapshots another time. But yeah, so let's do this. We're gonna make some new folders. You know what? Because I'm making so many new folders, we're just gonna do this in the terminal. See where we are. Okay, source JS. And we have actions and reducers already, and we do have constants. So I actually don't have to make that many new folders. I'm just going to make a containers folder, and I'm going to move our GitHub container to that. Because when I build a React app, and I'm setting forth the structure, that's kind of the structure I like to follow. So we will move from components, the GitHub container, to containers. And that'll break our app, and we'll just go in and we'll fix that stuff. That file doesn't exist now, but our app becomes containers. Okay, and this is just some organizational structure I like to do. Can't resolve loading spinner. That makes sense. So we'll go to our container and update where we were getting anything in here. And we'll get the other one as well. And all should be well with the world. It's compiling, and it's compiled successfully. Sweet. All right, so we've got a little bit more structure, and what we're going to do is this logic here. This is going to get moved out of the component and moved into an action, and actually it's going to be kind of split into a few actions. Before we do that, let's kind of discuss how Redux works. All right, so. If you've heard of Redux before, which I'm sure many of you have, but if you haven't, let's pull it up. I'll go to the repo itself. It's called a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. I've done a talk on this in the past. I don't know if I'll remember it quite right. Let's see if I can. Fibonacci clock. It might be called that because I did okay. I'm going to find it for you real quick. I gave a talk on Redux, a Redux primer. Here you go. So here are some slides that also will go along with what I'm kind of talking about, and this covers all the things we're going to cover tonight. So if you forget anything I say, you can go look at this. You can also go read these docs. Another great thing is Dan Abramov, the creator of Redux, made a really great Egghead IO series that's totally free to watch, and he walks you through basically building up Redux and understanding what it does. But essentially, what Redux is it's a giant. It can be giant. It's a JavaScript object that you just hold in the global state, right? And what we're going to do is we are going to subscribe to changes, and when those things change, we're gonna use actions. You're gonna see this word dispatch. We're gonna dispatch actions, and these actions will be functions that return plain JavaScript objects, POJOs, as you may have heard them, and these will be taken by a function. And that function is called a reducer. And it will always take a state, the current state, and an action. And it will always return your next state. And it'll always be the same. What we'll come to find out is that reducers need to be pure functions. The way Redux was intended to be used, it enables all sorts of interesting patterns and things, especially debugging. It gives you things like time travel, but it also makes them really testable, because everything in a Redux store is a pure function. We're going to avoid making mutations, and we can talk about that a little bit more as we get into it. But that's kind of the way to think about it. We're going to dispatch actions up. We're going to get into our reducer, and it's going to calculate the next state, and our app is going to basically render based on the new state. And we'll do this again. It's like taking set state, but instead moving it outside of the component itself into a more global scope and something that can affect our entire application. And that's actually how I want you all to think about Redux. Redux is not a band-aid, or it's not a fix-all. It's not going to fix your organizational problems, and it really doesn't need every bit of state in your application. What we'll find out as we're working with it is it really should only have the state that's important to most, if not all, your application. There are still plenty of times where component state is very useful and even recommended versus Redux. All right, I've talked enough about it. I can tell because I'm thirsty. Let's get into it. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna add some action types. Action types are just a string. We're gonna need these to check in our reducers, and you'll see why soon enough. This is just from my React Nano Kit project I have, and I send it out with a test action type and a few tests that don't really do anything. So that was an artifact of that. Let's write our first ones. This file, your action types, at least from me in my experience, is literally just a big file of exporting consts, and they typically look like this. So we know we're going to request a user's data. So we can call it request user profile. We'll call it. So and we'll make a string that's exactly that, right? So we need to request a profile, but really, like, there's more than one part to a request, right? Like, sure, we make the request, but there's other actions that happen. We're gonna receive a response, and we're either gonna get it successfully or we're gonna get a failure. So let's make those as well. And often what I do is, yeah, I'll just do this, and no, nothing wrong about using your editor's tools to make multiple cursors and make this much easier for you. So I totally recommend you learning your editor as well as you can. Anything that makes you a little bit faster. I mean, come on. We all just want to get more done in the day, or get the same amount done with less energy. I don't. Maybe you're someone who really likes to chill, so maybe that's right up your alley. But essentially, our app at the moment is going to need at least these three actions. We're going to request a user profile, and we're going to handle a success, and we're going to handle a failure. So you can name these what you want. I think what's more important is that you name it consistently, or that your team agrees upon like how you want to handle naming these action types. So the next thing you need in Redux is you need actions. And it just dawned on me that I've totally forgotten to show you how to set up the store. But I'm not going to jump there yet because I've already gone down this path. So we'll talk about actions, we'll get to the reducer, and then I'll show you the whole setup of the store. Sorry if that's a little backwards. I'm making this up as I go. I hope you'll forgive me. Redux and chill. Yeah. All right. So this is a fake little action creator here, but it's the basic pattern. You'll make a function. That function may or may not take arguments, and they'll be returned in what's often referred to as a payload. This payload is just a plain JavaScript object. All actions must have a type. That's why we define our action types in another file. Like, we want to be able to, we define them in one place rather than writing strings here, so that we'll be able to get those types again in our reducers and be able to export them to our tests, be able to use it. So let's split this into two files right there. I'm actually going to make my sidebar go away so we can keep our eye on this. But we're going to request the user profile, and we can even, we'll get fancy here. We'll make it request more than just my name. We'll have a username here, and what we'll do is we'll set the type to types request user profile, and we will say username. So this action will have both a type and a username property. And if you're wondering how I got those types in here, if you've never used this star syntax, this will pull all the named exports out of a file for you and just put them on this object here. And that way we do types.request user profile, we'll get this string. And let's write the other ones. We will, I need to rename this. It's not a good name for this function. We'll call it request user profile. And here we'll do our receive success and our receive fail. So receive user profile success. And we will get a response here. We'll get an object, right? So let's, at this point it would be a profile maybe, or a user. We'll call it we'll call it our user, and we're going to return another object of type types.receive user profile success, and our user, and we'll make another one. In fact, let's just copy this. And we'll change it to fail. Now when we fail, we'll get an error, and we want to take that error and we want to do something with it. So we'll handle that. Now here is, we have these three functions, but really they end up getting used in concert with each other. We'll basically never use them without using the other ones. So I want you to keep that in mind. We're going to come back to this file in a little bit, and we're going to make another action that handles our asynchronous behavior that we need to dispatch these actions to our store in the order we need to. All right, so we've had action types, we've had actions, or action creators more specifically. Action creators create actions, they get dispatched somewhere, and where they get dispatched to and received is our reducers. And our reducer kind of looks like this. So I'm going to get rid of this one for now. But essentially, this is a reducer is a function that takes a state and an action. And if no state is supplied by default, like the very initial setup of our reducer, then we want to pass in an initial state. So what we like to do is we like to set up our state in a way that makes sense throughout applications. So once again, name things with meaning and intent. I'm going to move my actions over to this window now so that I can kind of see what's going on. But I get a username in one of the actions. That could be useful to me, but what's really important is the user data that I end up receiving and the error down here. So what we'll do is we'll do this. We're going to make a value waiting for user profile, and we'll set this to false. What we can do with this is we'll toggle this one when we're in the middle of the request. That way, if we really wanted to display any state in our app while waiting, we could use this value as something to indicate that we're making a request, we haven't received a success or fail yet. Other things that we'll need is we can store that username that we have up there. That's probably not as it's not super useful to me, but it could be, especially in your application, if you needed to make like on a failure, you wanted to just save the username and try again, or maybe there's some other reason. But really, the big one here is we need the user. So we'll set a user to null while we don't have any, and then if it does fail, we'll get an error. So we'll say error. And we can also put something like has error is false. And this will kind of be our global state at the moment. And what we want to do in our reducer is we got this action, and you can see right here the default is we return state. So what a reducer does is based on the action in the current state, it'll always return the same state, right? And what we do is we create cases that handle each of our types. So like it checks the action type here on line 11, and if those type matches one of our cases, we're going to handle that state at that moment that way. So we'll write cases based on what we have on the right in our actions. So request user profile. And when we request a user profile, what are we going to want to do? We're going to want to return all our state with a few modifications, right? So one nice way to do this is to do object rest spreading. And in order to do this, I believe, I'm going to pull up my package JSON, but you'll need this plugin in your Babel setup for now. And you can have it imported some other way. Maybe you're doing something like Babel plugin env, where it's based on your environment and automatically gets pulled in. But this will allow you to do this syntax here. If you don't have that plugin and it's not available to you, another way to make sure you do this with immutable objects, that is a new object. We don't want to take our state and mutate it anyway. Let me show you what a bad way to do this would be, because it would basically break the Redux pattern. But if you did something like here, we have const old state no, well, that's breaking it. If we did something like state that waiting for user profile equals true, return state. Um, this is not the way Redux is meant to be done, because what can happen when you do a mutation this way is we can basically impurify this function. It's totally possible now to create a function that won't always return the same state, and that predictability is what makes Redux so powerful and so useful, is that it forces you into these patterns that really help you reason about your application and really avoid some major bugs that come from mutating state when you didn't intend to. So what we have to do is instead we have to return the next state as a brand new object. This also helps our applications be more efficient, because objects in JavaScript are stored by reference as opposed to being stored by my brain is not thinking right. They're stored by a reference in memory as opposed to being stored as the value itself. And so the way React and JavaScript in general can tell if two objects are the same is, do they have the same reference, not are they the same internally. And so if they have different references, we know we can make an update, right? Because our, like, say for instance, like we have one state and the next state. If we know they're different different references, we know we can fire the update. So that's very useful. This is how you want to handle that. If you don't have the spread operator, you would do something like this: object.assign an empty object, and then from there object.assign just takes all the remaining arguments as objects and merges them in. So the first one will merge a state, and then we would do something like waiting for user profile is true. When we make the request, we are waiting for it to come down. That being said, this is kind of very verbose. Maybe you do something like empty assign equals object dot assign, or like you end up making some kind of function that's curried and ready to do. Let's use object spread, as I said before. So what we do is we'll spread the state as is. So that literally this is basically object.assign, but in one nice little line. It spreads all the state. So in this case, the first time we come through, it'll spread all of this, the initial state. And then from there, we can just say waiting for user profile is true. And that's the state we're going to return right now. Gray Sal in the chat asks, what's the advantage of using an arrow function to assign a function instead of just using the function keyword and the typical function? He says, or she says, I'm sorry, absolutely no gender in that name, so I should be better about that. But they say, I always found the latter much cleaner in terms of syntax, plus you get the benefit of hoisting, so you don't have to declare it before you use it. Sure, that's absolutely right. Functions do get hoisted, whereas arrow functions are not hoisted in the same way, right? The variable name, the declaration, gets hoisted, but the assignment doesn't come till later. So you have what's called the temporal dead zone, where if you did something like if I tried to call reducer here, this fails, right? Because hoisting would move it up to the top of the file, and then assignment doesn't come until the line it happens, and then it would come here and it'd be like, I don't know what reducer is. I'm gonna fail on you. One of the benefits of it is it actually applies this differently. I don't I'm not very eloquent when it comes to describing this, but essentially it doesn't create like a new scope. When you have like nested functions, right? Like function this. Oh, that's a horrible name. Let's do foo. I cannot do that. Foo and foo function bar. Like, what does this refer to, right? In this case, this I hope I'm getting this right. If I'm wrong, you can tell me. But it would refer to here, not here, which is why you saw a lot of like, well, before we had const, we had var, right? I would do this one a lot, and then I would do this dot baz. Like if I had a baz method on an object or something like that, you'd see a lot of that. What you can do these days with arrow functions is this doesn't get changed, right? So const boo equals this is the same. We don't have to do that extra step of storing away the this to use in a different place. You might have also seen it as like var self equals this. That was very common. So that's one advantage. Another advantage of arrow functions is honestly the cleanliness when you're writing, especially curried functions or any kind of partial application and more calls. This isn't a functional programming lesson. I would love to teach you guys a little bit about that at some point. This is really brief. I'm not going to go into depth. I'm just answering his question. But for example, let's say I want to... currying is the act of taking a function that takes multiple parameters and spreading them out so it's a series of functions that take one parameter at a time. The classic example would be like the canonical example is addition, right? Function add x and y, return x plus y, right? Okay. If we wanted to make that curried, function curried add, and we're going to do it the old way, we'll take an x and we'll return a function that takes a y and we'll return x plus y. That might not seem too verbose to you at this point, but imagine having to curry many arguments, maybe 3, 4, 5 or more, nesting all these return functions. When I can write that very same thing, I'll call it curad because I can write this. If I could type. And I find this to be very legible and succinct. And so if you start to write a lot more functions that return other functions, I think it just becomes, it's like habit, it just takes time. But if you keep with it, like you'll read it like you read the other one. It won't bother you at all. At least I don't think so. I've come to really enjoy arrow functions and the speed at which I can write them. So that's just me, especially with the implicit return. Like that is so nice, not having to write return. It really does save me quite a bit of lines actually throughout my application, including right here. We're implicitly, well, actually this one isn't an implicit return. My bad. That is incorrect. But we'll see later as we map state to props in our components that we will implicitly return an object. So sorry for that digression. I hope that's a sufficient answer for you. And if not, feel free to send me something on Twitter, and we'll try and drill down, or I'll try and help. But I hope that gives you what you were looking for. So yeah, let's get through our cases. We have a few other cases to get through. We need to handle our receiving of the user profile success. And what happens on success? Well, we spread the current state out, waiting for user profile is false. We're no longer waiting. And we'll set the user to action.user. If you recall in our actions, right, like Receive user profile success is the one that sends out this type, and it also adds a user to the action payload. Excuse me. And so we'll want to set that as our next state. And then we have one more, types.receive fail. We'll want to return, we'll spread the state, and waiting for user profile is false, has error is true. And I mean, that might be redundant. We can just check if it has an error itself, but we will set the error. In fact, let's do this. That I really enjoy not having to remember how things are named. Binary sloth tree asks for request user profile. Should you set has error to false? You know, that's actually not bad. If we make a second request, so let's take that suggestion and roll with it. It will do us no harm if it's already false. And if it's true, we're trying again. So I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Binary Sloth Tree. And Filthy Rotting Creep just hopped in and already learned something. Awesome. Not sure what you learned, but I'm really glad I can help. So I'm glad you're learning, Creep. I don't need to go through all the adjectives. I'm sure you're not quite that filthy. At least I hope not. And I hope you're not rotting. Are you like a zombie programmer or something? I hope not. I'm just going to go with that. Okay, so we have cases now for all our actions. Creep is fine. Leprosy. If you actually have leprosy, I'm very sorry. I wish I could perform some kind of like Jesus-like miracle on you and cure you. So I hope you don't, though. If you do, I know nothing about leprosy really. So if you think about it, we're all rotting. Maybe I don't know. At some point, we'll all be rotting, unless you do cremation or something like that. I told you, this is more than you asked for, so we definitely talk about things not related to JavaScript at some point, right? All right. And yeah, our default, we just want to return the state we get. So I've kind of jumped the gun on some things, and we've written out most of the steps we need. We should actually look at the store itself. I'm going to close up some files, clean this up, and we're going to pull up our store.js file. All right. So in order to use Redux, I kind of recommend you create a store.js file at the base of your JavaScript folder, and then depending on how you use it, you might see. In my case, I'm using it with a package called React Redux. It's a really well-named package. It's just a bridge basically between the two libraries, Redux and React. And what we'll see is I don't have it in here, I believe. How am I providing it to my application? Oh, I don't think I've added it yet. I haven't. Awesome. We'll get to remember how to do that. So going back, we need to create our store, and the way we do that is with the create store. Sorry, I got a little distracted. I like reading the chat, but sometimes you'll see me like whoa. So Creep doesn't know JavaScript, but that's great. I'm glad you're here. We'll try and teach you a little bit of JavaScript. I hope it's not too confusing. So we have this really handy function that they gave us called create store, and create store takes a reducer, and you know what? Let's just look up the arguments, because honestly, I'm not going to remember it all. It looks like I'm going to pull it up into the window here. There we go. Create store takes a reducer. You saw the reducer we made, and we exported that. It can take a preloaded state and enhancers, and these are optional arguments. And what we see is the enhancer is a function, and what we're going to use is actually the apply middleware function. But create store essentially will create that global store we need that we're going to be able to export around and use throughout our application. It's where our state lives. And then apply middleware is pretty much exactly what you think. It takes any number of middlewares and honestly, the docs go into a really good depth of how to write a middleware and explaining all of it. But essentially, it's a way to go between, I believe, your reducer and then all your middlewares, and then eventually the exported store. I could be wrong a little bit on the order. Please don't quote me on it just yet. But please, whenever I teach you something, I really encourage you to go read the documentation. You'll never find more accurate information. Hopefully you'll never find more accurate information than to actually just read the documents created, especially really big projects that people have poured lots of time into making them useful and well written. So I think the Redux ones are really well written. That is Dash. Wow, so clutch. I have a Dash integration with Alfred. I haven't figured out how to get Alfred to show up on my second monitor to, you know what, why don't we try and fix that right now? See if I can figure that out. Features, maybe. Can it show appearance, maybe? I know y'all really wanted to see me do this. Options. Can I get it in both windows? Show Alfred on active screen. Close. Okay, so I use Alfred instead of Spotlight. I've bought the Power Pack. I've got like workflows and snippets and stuff, and I use it a lot. But I have a Dash integration with it where I can look up all sorts of things. For instance, I have the Redux thing in there. So when I was looking up Create Store, that's how I found it. And it works really great. If I want to find like React, let's say component, or lifecycle. There's a good one. Lifecycle. Might help if I continue to spell it properly. You can find what you're looking for, right? It's been one of the most helpful integrations I've ever had. I know I'm teaching Redux, but honestly, go get yourself Dash and Alfred, and if you have a Mac, it's like so helpful. It's really sped up my life. In fact, I get really sad, like so sad when I cannot find doc sets for the things I use. Anyways, let's go back. I want to make sure we get through this. Okay, so we're creating our store right here. We're passing in the reducer we're getting from reducers. That's what we just made. You're going to see this here. I love using this package. This is called Redux DevTools extension. It is wonderful. It's not going to show anything at the moment because we don't have Redux fully integrated and we don't have any actions being fired. So I don't think it might work. It might not. No store found, right? Because we don't have a store yet in place. Hold that thought. We'll get back to that. I do want to show you that. It's like one of the most helpful tools ever. And we also have Thunk in here. Thunk is a small package that allows us to do asynchronous Redux. It allows us to dispatch actions in an asynchronous fashion so we can handle things like requests. We're definitely going to use this today. But we have our store and we're exporting it. How do we get our store into our application? That's the important thing that we don't have quite yet. Well, what we can do is we can import provider from React Redux. I'm trying to remember if provider, I think it's like that. I don't think, I don't think it's, I can't remember if it's the default, I can't remember if it's the default, oh, there it is right there. Can't remember if it's the default output of it or if it's, something that needs braces. I think it's the default output. we'll just give it a try. But what you'll see here is basically what provider is provider is a component that allows us to make our store accessible to our entire application. And what we'll use after using provider is a connect higher order component to actually connect with that store. I need to pull in the store. I haven't done that yet, so we'll import store from store. And as you can see, we're supplying it here. We'll let Prettier do its thing. There it goes. Updating our indentation for us. And this should make our store accessible. And if I did it right, oh yay! It's look, React Redux is working again. Tazbar asks, that looks sweet. Do you use code snippets from Alfred or editor? I use both. Mostly the editor, but I do have a few snippets, especially terminal snippets, that I use frequently enough that I have them stored in Alfred. And also, you'll probably appreciate this, but I do have the shrug also set as a snippet because you don't always have emojis available. Although I do have an emoji workflow in Alfred. That's really nice too. So my digression. Create element. Expected a string for built-in components or a class function. Check the render method of app in app. Did I do something wrong? I mean, I did something wrong, but what did I do wrong? It might be expecting a single child, which it should get with div. All right, well, this is how it goes. Live debugging, people. React create element type is invalid. Expected a string for built-in components or a class function for composite components. Not sure provider is default. Okay, that's what I was wondering before too. So thank you, Newt Cat. She is awesome. Suze Hinton, go find her on Twitter right now, and you need to follow her on Twitch if you haven't before. She is fantastic. She's the old pro at this. She's the one paving the way for people like me doing, our silly little things. That was perfect. Thank you for debugging for me. That's why y'all need to watch. Y'all help me debug. But look at it. Okay, so now the React DevTools is working. We can actually see our state here. We could see actions. Here's the thing. I haven't dispatched an action anywhere in my app yet. I haven't shown you how to do that, but I can do request user profile. And that doesn't have anything else. Oh, it does have a username, right? So username is Kyle Shevlin. I didn't do anything with it, but we'll dispatch it and look at it. It has our action. You saw how the state updated. It shows you the diff of what's happening. And it's so awesome. I can actually time travel. I can say skip and it goes back, and we'll see how this actually works in just a few minutes, but it's really cool. It's a very helpful tool for debugging your applications, especially when you start getting into more complicated states. So get it, use it. It's great. As you saw, it has great instructions how to do it. So just a package, and you wrap your middlewares in it, and it just, man, I'm so glad to have it. All right, so now our store is connected to our application, but none of our components are connected to the store, right? So that's what we need to do next. Now, last week we broke our data fetching and our presentation into two separate components. We called them container components and presentational components. We're going to make the container component continue to do our work for us, but rather than putting the actual fetch itself in there, we are going to move that into our action creator, and then we'll just call our action creator from the component. So let's look at how that'll go. Oh, she's blushing. When people do good stuff, I really love giving props around the internet. I've often said I may not do anything like that gets a lot of GitHub stars, but I can be encouraging. And I think I really wish and I hope more people like take that to heart. Like we probably all won't be superstar coders, but we can be really, frankly, we can be superstars to each other, right? Like, you know, maybe this is the old pastor in me. Those of you who don't know, I was a pastor before I taught myself how to code and made this career. And maybe it's just that in me, but you know, I kind of look at it. We're all gonna die someday, so you know, we can either spend a life being really shitty to each other, or we can spend a life trying to be constructive to each other. That doesn't mean you're always happy. It doesn't mean you're always like super nice. I mean, sometimes there's a vast difference between what is good and what is nice, but you know, I want to be good, and one of the things I can be good at is being encouraging. So, you know, I hope you consider that too in your life. Maybe you're really awesome and great at it. I hope so. And if not, maybe try it a little bit more. You never know. You never know how people will respond if you just be a little more encouraging to them. So, cool. Thank you for my digression. You know, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna pull this out and essentially, I'm gonna store that away for a second, but let's do this the Redux way. Okay, so we won't even need a state anymore, and we won't actually have that anymore either. I'll fix that in just a second, but what we will have is we're gonna pull in the connect higher order component from React Redux. This will allow us to connect to our store. And the way you use that is down here. What we actually want to export from this file is not the GitHub container itself. You may sometimes see export GitHub container. You may see that, or actually you might see it up here, like export class GitHub container. That way you can test the container component itself, and then we still want to export by default the connected component, because that's what we want to get. That's what we want to have put into our application. But it is a curried function, or I should say it's a partially applied function. It's not truly curried. There's up to 4 arguments here, but you typically only use 2 arguments. What those arguments are often called are map state to props and map dispatch to props. And we'll actually use both here. So sometimes I even go so far as to just write the variable names before I've even used them, because I know I will use them. So what that means is, and you know what, since I'm going to have props, I know I'm going to need prop types. Okay, so we'll get prop types, and we'll handle that in a second, and that white space is driving my eyes crazy. But what we're going to do, and let me move the sidebar again so that I'm worried that like I might eventually get code down here in my beautiful face, and I want you to be able to see everything. Map state to props. So what we mean by state here is not the component state. We mean our global state, right? The Redux store is our state. And what we're going to do is we're going to take little pieces of our state and we're going to map them to, basically we're going to create an object, return an object that maps them to props that get passed to our GitHub container so we can access them in our lifecycle method and a render as props, right? So the way this works is it's a function that takes state as its first argument, and we're going to return an object where we've mapped prop values, their name, to state values in our store. So in this case, let me look at a reducer. You'll want to keep your reducer in mind as you do these, because this is kind of the state you're mapping to. And what we'll do now is we'll map waiting for user profile. why don't we call that, actually let me show you something, because to really tell you that these get mapped to props, like you can name this whatever you want. You can name the prop what you want as long as you map it to the state you need to. So we'll call it is loading, and we'll map it to state waiting for user profile. You see what I did there? We're going to have this state passed to us. That's this argument. And we're going to return an object that maps this part of our state to this prop name. This will be the prop name available up here. So instead of like data per se, we can do is loading this dot props, and we actually have to reverse these now. If it's loading, we want to show the spinner. And if it's not loading, show the profile. And we can make this more robust in a little bit. But we also want to get the user, since that's the data we want. You know, here would be a useful place also to just basically get them all. If we're going to handle the error case. So let's get has error. State. So this can feel a little tedious at times, and there are packages out there to help reduce the tedium of this mapping, but this is the pattern you use. So I want to teach you the pattern and allow you to have the tools to go find what makes this even more efficient for you. And then we'll have our error. Right? Okay. Now map dispatch to props. So in Redux, there's this concept of the store has a method called dispatch, and what that does is takes an action or an action like an action creator and sends that action to the store, right? So what we can do is we can actually map our action creators. We'll import them in a second. We can map them to as props as well, so that we have them available to us in our, like in this case, we'll have this dot props, and I'll make it, but fetch user profile, etc. We'll do that, right? So the way we'll do this is map dispatch to props is a little different. There's a very helpful function that's built into the second argument of connect. That means we only have to use an object to pass these in. So in very complicated components, you might have all sorts of functions here that you'll just list, and they'll get bound to the correct dispatch so that they can be sent to the store. In our case, we're going to write a function we don't even have yet, which is fetch user profile. And then that gets mapped here. And let's import it. Fetch user profile from, in this case, it's our actions. And we'll have to go make that. And then we'll get into a few other things. This is totally broken. We know that. We'll fix it in a little bit. But this is how you start to connect Redux to your component. Let's go make fetch user profile really quick. Let's go to actions, the index. So I've mentioned thunk a couple times. Thunk can be a bit of a confusing concept to people, but essentially, oh, good night, Clutch. Thank you for joining for the time you could. Sorry, Clutch was saying good night, and I try and be responsive to people, but okay, thunks. Thunks are function. A thunk is a value that's stored as a function to delay evaluation as opposed to the value itself. I am not missing the dispatch parameter binary sloth tree. That's a good catch. You can do that way. Let me comment this out for a second. The long way to do that, you can do map dispatch to props. You could do dispatch, and then you can do this, where you'd actually do fetch user profile is dispatch fetch. It's been so long since I did it this way, but I think that's how you used to do it. What I was mentioning is that Redux has bind action creators. Let me pull up the documentation for you. This is automatically called on the second argument, so what you can do is you can just pass it an object of action creators, and it'll bind the dispatch for you. You don't have to pass in the dispatch parameter itself. It's there by default. It's actually pretty nice. So you can just do it as this object. And because we're using ES6, right, like this is actually the same as fetch user profile. It's mapping a key to our function up here. So, trust me, this will work. And if it doesn't, well, you can laugh insidiously at me. I mean, if I'm wrong, I just go ahead and let out the most like evil, like yesterday evil, Halloween evil laugh. I won't be able to hear it, but I'll feel it like right here. It'll hurt. Let's make our thunked function. What I meant by a thunk was, so let's say we have like const foo equals 42, right? Foo immediately gives us 42. What if we want to delay that somehow? What we can actually do is delay the evaluation of getting 42 until we call the function. So now we call a function, and this will return 42. That's the essence of a thunk. It's we make evaluation lazier by adding basically an intermediate step. Kyle Simpson has a really great course on front-end masters that goes much more in depth on thunks, and he's frankly a much smarter than me about JavaScript. So you can look up his material. His You Don't Know JS series is totally free on GitHub to read, and you can find it. But we're gonna make a new function, fetch user profile, and what we're gonna do, this will need the username. I guess it's kind of bad that I'm doing that because I'm not going to add an input right now to actually add a username. Maybe we'll do that later if there's time. But what we're going to return is it's going to get the dispatch method given to it. We're going to give it a function, and it's going to give the dispatch method to it. And we'll use that dispatch throughout our function to dispatch our actions and the sequence we want to. So in this case, immediately when we fetch the user profile, what we want to do is we want to fire the request user profile like this. So we'll request the user profile and we'll hand it the username. That's the first thing we want to do. So it'll update that state. I'm using function syntax here versus const because of how exports work. I've run into bugs in the past trying to do export const fetch user profile. I don't know all the exact details on how it works, but there's something about exporting a function like an arrow function this way that's led to some bugs. So just for the top layer of my functions, I tend to use export function. I'm sure you can Google a really great answer about that. This is a pattern at this point that I've learned, but you can use arrow functions inside it all you want. I think it has to do something with how assignment and declaration are done, and how that works with exporting. I'm sorry I can't give you a more detailed answer, but I won't bullshit you an answer I don't fully understand. So my apologies, but that's the best I got for you right now. Now I'm going to pull in some code. It's going to seem like a bit like magic, but Alfred has this built-in snippet actually it's clipboard history, right? So let's save this real quick and get the indentation fixed up. But we've just pulled in we were able to pull in that function I used to have in our component, and we're going to fix it up a little bit. So we need to make sure we get Axios into our component, and that way it has access to that. And then here we can do a username. We need to make this a template literal instead. But now we'll have a way of making our request. We don't have state anymore, right? Like that's not how this one works. So we can just get rid of that. And what we'll do is whenever you have a then, right, like you have a response and you have a rejection. What we can do is in here, in a response, typically it's as simple as dispatching our receive user profile success and like response.data, right? It's typically that simple, and then we handle that up here. This one's going to be a little more complicated because we have the second then that we need to handle. Instead of reject, I often call it error. And then here, we'll also do dispatch receive user profile fail error. And I have a cat joining me really quick. I don't know if y'all can see her, but this is Tally. Tally's starting to get a little hungry and a little restless, so she may perk her head up once in a while. I actually did need that. Let me try and make this a little... Oh, I'm sorry, folks. I totally forgot. Y'all can't see that. My bad. I'm so sorry about that. The reason we use error here, gray, is that we actually want to handle it in the reject part of the then. This isn't an error in the same sense. We should be handling both the resolve. This is the resolve and the reject in this case. You might be able to handle it in catch, but we know that in a promise that like a then receives both these arguments, so it just makes sense to do it this way. In this case, we actually need to do two things in the response. We need to I can't talk. We not only need to dispatch the receive user profile success, but we need to return the response.data.repos URL. And that return gets put here. And then we'll fire off our second one, and we can actually handle this just the same. We'll have a response, and we can actually dispatch success again, but we'll need to handle it a little bit differently. I'm trying to think through it. And then here we can handle error again. And I suppose you could try a catch. We can give that a try for sure. As I've said before, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I'm sorry I don't. I wish I had them, because I would prefer to be really omniscient and know everything, but I don't. and I'm doing the best I can. Let's pull that out here. We need to pass response in here. I'm kind of jumping around the place. Actually, yeah, we need to pass this is what we need to do. Our user now is a combination of the previous data we had and the response we're getting now. So we actually are going to spread the data again, but we're going to add a repos. You can see it down here. We're going to add that. So yeah, let's do that. Instead of doing it this way and trying to do it all in line, let's just update our user with like normal sane people. So our data, no, we'll call it our user equals, we're going to spread the data that we have, and repos is response.data.map repo.full name, and then we'll pass the user in. Okay, that's in that then. Let's see how this looks. Okay, I need to reason through this, make sure I got it right. So we're going to make our initial fetch with the username we pass in. We're going to get a response. This is successful. And you know what? I'm going to do a quick git diff on this file. Just no output. What are you talking about? Oh, because I moved what... That's my bad. Well, can I do git diff components, GitHub container? I mean, if it's gone... No. Son of a biscuit. Okay. Well, I'm just going to trust myself then. That's probably bad advice, but I'm going to trust myself. Okay. Our first response, we are going to dispatch receive user profile success with our data, which should be our user object. We are going to return that data so it's accessible in our next then, and we're going to handle the rejection case. And we will need a catch, because it is totally possible that this first one would fail and then this then would fail, and so we'll throw a catch in there anyways. But we handle the error here, and then we've returned the data, so the next then gets that, and this is internal to it. So we do a second fetch on the repos URL, and then we have our next response, right? We have that, and in this response, we take we create a user based on the data we have here in closure. We spread it out and we add a repos array to it, but we map just the full name, so it's just names and strings. And then if we get an error, we get that. And I think this is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. And then what we get up here is, so we've now we have exported. We've now moved our fetching data into our action creator itself, and you can see we'll be able to dispatch to the store appropriately when those actions happen. Yes, async await might be able to make this easier to follow, and I will get to that at another time. I actually don't have a problem reasoning about promises, and so I haven't jumped on the async await bandwagon all that much. It's nothing wrong with it. I'm so used to writing these by now that it doesn't really bug me. I don't need my async code to look more synchronous. But I think it's great, and I am starting to come around to it. It's been really useful at work in our tests. And maybe in a future episode, I'll just take this and I'll write it as a comparison. Sorry for that digression, but that's a great question, Tazbar. I think the key here is both work. So use what's most comfortable to you and easiest for you to understand. Now in a component did mount, all we do is this .props .fetch user profile, and because I'm lazy, I'm actually just going to pass in my name here. So every time this comes up, it'll fetch the user profile. Sorry, my cat decided to scratch me. It'll fetch my profile, and it'll update that data. Yes, it's absolutely a fun little one. I haven't gotten to use it as much as you probably have, Jen. Nick Code Monkey writes, Redux Observable is another fun option for bridging RxJS and Redux. It's a lot of fun. I haven't gotten a chance to really use it in a big project, but I'm excited to learn it a bit more, especially since I want to learn a little more RxJS. So I'm glad you brought that up. Cubax asks, why did I choose Thunks? I chose Thunks because honestly, I've always used Thunks. I have not had a problem yet that it was so complicated I couldn't do it with Thunks. I do think I'll spend a little time checking out sagas and Redux observables, as Jen just suggested, so that I can share that with the channel. But I think a thunk is actually the simplest one. Since my course is mostly about doing the very basic thing, I think that should be your introduction, and then use the other things as you want to. All right, so we're going to fetch my profile when the component mounts, and what we're going to do is we'll check if it's loading, or we can do if is loading return. We can split this out, right? It doesn't have to be our ternary. I like ternaries quite a bit. And then if we want to pass the user down, so is loading. Well, you know what? It's handling it. We know we'll have the user by the time this all works, and we can display an error if we had an error state, and I will handle it at some point. I want to make sure we get a working example done before the time's up. Time is flying tonight. Okay, so I don't need this. Okay, if it's loading, show the spinner. Otherwise, I should have the user show the profile with the user. That should be the gist of all this. Notice we didn't have to change our presentational component at all. And it looks like I have some errors. Looks like I messed some stuff up. That's not unusual. I mess a lot of things up. Looks like I have an extra... was it on 38? It was on 38. I have an extra one here. There we go. Oh, and see, Prettier did its thing, so that's a good sign. See if I have other errors. Okay, I didn't define any prop types. Prop data is marked as required in GitHub Profile, but its value is null. Okay. Cannot read property login of null. Good call. Kevin Van Gelder asks, have I used API sauce? I have never heard of API sauce. Can you post a link in the chat, man? I would love to see that. I'm not using doc type. What's he mean? In my template, I have it there. I'm sorry it's capitalized. Is that somehow wrong these days? Anyways, let's fix our prop types on our container, because I haven't done any yet. Prop GitHub container dot. Why does it keep? Oh, it keeps pulling up profile because of that. Thank you, Kevin. Let's see, what props are we getting? We're getting is loading, is a prop types of bool, is required. We're getting a user of prop types dot, it's a shape. There's a lot of things going in this. I might just call it an object and fix the ESLint later because I don't want to deal with it. Has error is also a bool. I keep saying that I'm going to disable my linter while I'm streaming so I don't have to deal with these things, but I keep forgetting. Keep forgetting to do that. So let's let the linter go crazy. Tell me all the things I got wrong. Did I just write an object incorrectly? Failed unexpected token. Oh, why am I calling it const? That is silly of me. Okay. Let's see what other errors it's going to tell me. Okay. Fetch user profile. That's certainly in there. That should be a func. There we go. Let's see. Prop type object is forbidden. And we're just going to we are going to disable a whole bunch of things because I'm being lazy. And we'll do that again because I just don't want it yelling at me. Nope, don't want it. Can't handle it. We got in a few less messages. There we go. Is not required. It has no corresponding default. We'll call it is required. Is required. We will have is required. I don't recommend going on a... I know I can use prototype shape, but I don't know all the shape I have yet. Like, I don't remember it. I can look at GitHub. Actually, I guess I have the shape over here. All right. You win. You win. Okay. Anything else? I don't know what the error is going to be. So how many more ESLint errors do I have to get through? Just a few. Has error is defined, but prop is never used. Good call. Let's just get rid of it. Or we'll just do that for now. In fact, we'll do that for now. We're getting there. We're going to get them all. Error is not required, but has no corresponding default. Error prop type is defined, but prop is never used. Yep, that's a great way to not deal with that too. Is just do that. Okay. Oh, yay, we compiled successfully. I'm still getting errors. Yay. Failed prop type. The prop user is marked as required, but its value is null. So this shouldn't, I guess maybe this shouldn't be required. And what we'll do is we'll make a GitHub container dot default props user, and we'll just give it all these values and make them empty. This isn't necessarily the solution I would recommend, but it should solve the problem. Why am I getting so many errors tonight? This is a lot of fun. The prop data is marked as required in GitHub value, but its value is null. We will do this once more, but we'll do it over here. I'm sorry, folks, that this is a little messier than it should be. Oh, that's why, because it keeps picking up profile on my... so this can still stay is required. The prop data is marked as required, but its value is null. Son of a biscuit. Well, let's put those defaults over here. Maybe that's the key. We will move this over here, rename it. Oh, you can't see it again. Sorry. There you go. I need to save this file too. Come on. Why aren't you saving? There we go. If you can't tell, I'm getting a little frustrated. Should plan these out better. What on earth, people? Guys, you're seeing this, right? This is crazy. Okay, this is what we do. Instead of having null in our reducer, there's another way to handle this. We'll make this as required, right? So one thing I've often done in my reducer is rather than have this, right, I have like an empty state. I might even make like myself a class that acts as a model, and like in the initial state it would be like a new user that spits out like this. So now all those things are mapped, and eventually I will get this through. Cannot read property length of undefined. What step is that in? Repos.length. I wonder if in this action here, I might need to spread it out, and then I might need to add an empty repos array for the first response. A token 3374. Okay, it doesn't like that. Oh, because I didn't close out my object. Please, for the love. Oh, thankfully. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. A round of applause. Round of applause. Is required. I think we finally got it, folks. I think we finally got in it. We've gotten it. I'm going to give myself pats on the back. I'm going to give myself pats. I knew what I was trying to do. I knew what I was trying to do the whole time. I just couldn't quite find all the little bits and pieces, right? But that's how development goes. We've all been there, and I really appreciate all the support right there right now. Like, we all make stupid mistakes, even people who've been doing this for years and years and years. Okay, now that we've added this to Redux, like, let's take a look at what happened, right? Like, okay, let's reload this again. Okay, we're reloading the page. It showed loading just for the briefest time. What we can do is, like I said before, we can actually skip these things. So this is the first thing we can skip. So if we remember, I make two fetches in there. I make one for the profile to get the repo URL, and then a second one to get the repos, right? So you can see right here, this happens. In fact, we might want to refactor this and actually make another action. I think we really should, and I will in a second. And then the second one here is we have profile. This success was that in general. And now you can see, hey, our loading state is showing, right? This is based on, we can see the state at that moment. We were waiting for the profile. Our user is empty. We don't have anything. It doesn't have an error yet. And then we can unskip it. And the first time, boom, look at this. Look at all this data we get, right? Like, that's really cool. And we should have our repos array that we added, right? And then we'll skip it one more time, and boom, we have all our repos with their full names, right? Like, that's awesome. I think this is really cool how you can like skip any one of them and just see whatever state you'd end up at. Like, these aren't really as helpful to skip these ones back here because we already have our end state, but it's so useful. But let's take this a step further. Let's do the quick refactor, because it really shouldn't be user profile success quite this again, right? Like, it should really be a repos thing, That is Redux Dev Tools, Kevin. I really enjoy getting to use it. It makes me super duper duper happy. All right, so we want to do a quick refactor, right? Let's get to our action types because the second fetch is really request and receive repos. So what we can do is we will just duplicate all of this, and then wherever it says profile, we'll just switch it to saying repos. Okay, and then we'll go to our we will go to our actions file, and we'll largely we could largely duplicate all this. Again, let's do it this way. We will copy this down at the bottom here. We'll change profile. This will kind of mess up a little bit for me, but repos. And then I'll do this to get those three repos. Okay, instead of a user, these will be repos. Instead of a repo name, we don't actually need to worry about that per se. I won't even pass anything into it. We could just pass the username again like we did in the past, or the URL, or something like that. And then what we need to do is we can split this out, right? So we can make a function that is fetch repos or user repos, and we'll give it a URL. And what we'll do is we can take this stuff here, and we can move it into here. We'll have our URL. We'll also need to pass in. No, we won't do that. We'll handle that at the reducer. So in this case, the first thing we do is request user repos. Oh, actually, nope. The first thing we do is, again, make it a thunk. Dispatch request user repos. Fire that bad boy off. And then we take our request, we move it here, we do our URL. We have data that we need to pass in to, right? Like, no, we'll just handle it this way. We're getting a new thing of repos. We'll do it this way. And we'll just do receive user repos. We'll hand it the repos. Right? So our response, we map some repos from the response, and we'll pass the repos, right? That looks all good to me. I'm not going to call this from anywhere else, so I'll write export for the sake of being thorough, but we don't actually need to. But here we can dispatch fetch user repos with the data.repos URL, and that refactor should work. And then we need to handle it in the reducer. I know y'all are chatting a lot. I'm sorry I'm not looking at it right now. I'm just trying to do this kind of quickly. But we need to handle all these cases now. That request user repos. Well, we don't have this yet, but I'll add it. Waiting for repos is true. Receive might help if I spelled it right. Repos success. We will do return. This one is a little complicated. We'll do state, we'll do user, and we'll want to return all the state.user, but we'll also want to return the action.repos over it. Not that complicated, but when you start seeing a whole bunch of spreadings in objects, I know it can be a little confusing the first few times, but the syntax has really grown on me. Fail, and we'll divide this out. We'll just make it the error as well. Has error true and error. This isn't good. I would actually like take the time to make separate ones, but I'm trying to get through this really fast. I'm going to read these really quick. So I haven't done really any React Native, so I'm totally cool with y'all sharing your resources on it. And I would love to. I am working on an app as a side project that I think would be really good for a React Native project. So I plan to finish the web app here pretty soon and start making a native app. I'm using Firebase with it. You may have seen me on Twitter talking about that. So, all right. I think we've handled all our cases in a reasonable way for now. So we've got all our cases, and here's the magic. Like when we receive that repo success, we are updating just the repos and not our full user. I may have made a little boo-boo somewhere. Fetch user repos was defined before it was used. See, even with the function, you can get into little gotchas. So let's pull this out. I think it has to do with the exporting, like I said before. We'll just move this to the bottom. No big deal. Maybe that's a little easier to read now. We'll see. Boom. All right. So we've done a little refactor now. We took it, and it makes a little more sense too. We request the user's profile. We can skip things. Oh, I think I'm still calling request. Am I still calling? Okay, it just really wasn't what I was fully expecting, but oh yeah, no, that's perfect, sweet. So okay, we request the user profile. We go into our loading state. We get the profile. We do this. We request the user repos. We're still here. I could maybe add a loading even here. And then when we receive the user repos, boom, we have it. So this is the gist of Redux. It's this pattern of writing actions and action creators. We map them in our components and we dispatch them. They get received by our nice reducer here. And our reducer always returns back to us the state we were expecting. I thought I'd have a little bit more time to like write tests and show you guys how tests are really nice for these sorts of things. But it's already 9:45. I suppose we could try and knock some tests out. But as I like to do at nearing the close of every stream, I like to answer questions. So if you've saved any questions for me for now, this would be a great time to start sharing them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them they can be about Redux, they can be about React, they can be about me, they can be about, well, my cat's not here, I guess, but I'll tell you about her or him. I have two. But yeah, you can ask me away. I will try and let's try and write a test. A lot of times I actually like to write my Redux stuff with test-driven development because it's so easy to do in this case. Because actions just return simple objects, it's pretty easy to check that they're returning what I want them to. And because reducers are pure functions, they're also pretty easy to test. So if we were to come to our actions here, I'm importing all the actions. I'm using Jest. I've really started to like it. Testing was not something that was really necessary at my first two workplaces. I worked at agencies, and we just pumped out code really fast. And most of these projects were like a one and done kind of thing. They weren't long living things. As long as they worked, it was fine. But now I work at a different place, a product place, and tests are becoming a big part of my life, and I'm getting better at them. So I claim to be no expert, but like this should be I should be able to write a couple tests for you really quick. We're also going to import the types so that we have those available to us. So you can see down here I'm testing for a type. Types really are required on every action creator, so it makes sense to test that you're getting the right one. I'm going to get rid of this because this one doesn't even work anymore. But what were our actions? We had like request user profile, right? So let's test that one. Request user profile should return a Pojo with correct type and username. Okay, and then we just have our callback function here. And what we'll do is, how I like to do it is I like to actually like call my action. I generally call it like action equals action. Oh, well, let's define our username first. Username equals Kyle, because that's me. And then we'll call our action actions dot request user profile, and we'll pass in the username. And we'll write like expected. What do we expect? Well, we expect, well, I didn't need to do that. This could be an object literal. We expect a type to be types.request user profile, right? If we remember right. And we expect username to match. And then we can write expect type of action to equal object. Probably not necessary, but you can do it. And expect type of, nope, I don't need type of, action.type to equal you can request user profile, or oh, actually, I'm just sorry, expect action to equal expected. Sorry. I don't know what I'm thinking. It's late. I've got some questions there, but let's try this test out. See how bad I did. See if it works. Test action creator is not a function. Oh, that's in the reducer. No big deal. No big deal. But you see that our action passed. Let's actually, we can skip this one for now. Actually, that one's fine. We'll skip that one. Run our tests again, and we should see them all pass. Boom! And all our tests pass, except the one I skipped. That is... tests are really easy to write for these. I think you should do it. It's great. I see some questions in here. Is there a preferred lifecycle method to handle async calls? I know component did mount can cause a render flash, but is it really any better than component will mount? Great question. I'm going to try and remember React Armory. Please come up. Okay. So this is a really great website, reactarmory.com/guides/lifecycle simulators. It walks you through like really understanding how all the lifecycle methods get fired at when you do something. Like this is instantiation, state updates, prop updates. If you come all the way down to the bottom, notes, why avoid component will mount? the component will mount can accomplish many of the same things as a constructor and component did mount. Here's a few reasons why you should want to avoid it. When a component's props change within component will mount, the following call to render will still use the old props. So what ends up happening is you'll get the component to render and then immediately something will change, right? Like, whereas I think with component did mount, what it does better is while it delays the initial call, we're talking like almost an imperceivable amount of time that it delays the call, but it does allow you, the thing is already mounted, so you should handle in your component the state or the appearance of the DOM before having what you're calling component did mount, right? The other reason to do component did mount is you have to do it if you're doing refs, and that's like where you want to get your ref. It won't be available in component will mount because it's not on the page yet. There's no DOM object to get. So let's see. I think you gave a couple more. Also, you don't find it or not important to test that your action creator return the action. Isn't it just easier to test the action getting past the reducer returning back state? I think you actually want to test both your actions and your reducer. You want to make sure that I don't know what you gain. Like, if you write your actions very well, like I showed you, like there isn't much going on. So I can understand why that might not be what you expect, like might not be a very valid, like useful test to you, but they're really easy to write. But I don't like to couple unit tests like that, right? Like the action as a unit is really easy to test. And then reducer is really easy to test. I suppose if you want to treat it as an integration, you can test your actions inside of your reducer like you're suggesting, but when you do that, you're not actually guaranteeing that your action is doing what you expect it to do. You're just guaranteeing that the end result is doing what you expect it to do. I realize that in almost all cases, that's probably good enough. And if that's what your team or you decide to do, I mean, there's no one stopping you, right? Like I think if you have that kind of consensus, that's fine. But essentially, I like to treat them as I like to treat actions as unit tests and test them that way. And then I like to treat reducers basically as I don't know that they're exactly this, but the phrase like finite state machines, basically a state machine comes to mind. Like I will test variations of a step. I will have a state, pass an action to it, and make sure the state gets back. And the reason here's a good reason why they're separated, right? Like I want to focus on testing my reducer logic, not both my action and reducer logic, right? Like if I know my action works the way I expect because I've handled it in a unit test, then I can focus in on making sure the reducer logic does what it's supposed to do. Rather than, it's totally possible that there's some kind of mix, like perfect storm mismatch kind of thing where like the action I create and the store I make somehow ended up with what I wanted. I mean, a lot of times my reducers, I don't even pass in like a feasible like state. I'm because it shouldn't matter really what the object is. Like, I mean, feasible in the sense of like, I'm not mocking up full sets of data. Like, I'm testing very small pieces of my reducers, each case all the way through. So yeah. Cool. Yeah. Oh man. This was a good night. I mean, it was challenging for sure. I hope it didn't lose you too much in going around Redux and kind of getting your head around what's going on. But like I've really enjoyed using it. There are so many things built upon Redux now that, you know, as you've seen in the chat, you can you can see that there are many like libraries and tools available to you to modify and improve Redux. You can find middlewares, you can find wrappers, you can find projects that are like, for example, there's projects that'll make Redux work in tandem with your router, so that like your router state is available to you in Redux. You can there's like no limit to what you can probably find and do right now, but it's a very simple pattern. I think knowing the basic pattern is what's important to beginners. Maybe as some final points that we can discuss real quick is like, when is it appropriate to use Redux versus using set state? Because I kind of talked about that earlier, but I'd like to drive that home a little bit. For example, maybe I can try and code this up really quick. Normally our presentational components are just stateless functional components, right? GitHub Profile. Normally they're stateless functional components, but they could be a class component really easily. And I'll need to pull in component real quick, but Redux is great for things that are held at a more like global level in your application. Things that need to be available to multiple parts of your application, or like in our case, like our user that data might be used in dozens of places, right? But what if we did something like this? If we have a toggle, I'm going to add a button really quick. I'll do this as fast as I can. Toggle, and what we'll do is we'll set state in here that will show the list or not. Okay. State is visible, and oh, did I mess something up? Why didn't it correct itself? I must have messed something up. All right, well, I'm going to get to it. I can do it. What we will do is visible is the opposite of state is visible. Like, these things are perfectly good for being handled in component state versus Redux. Like, does my whole application need to know that I can see this list or not here, right? Like, I don't think so. That's actually like inefficient. You're adding more stuff than you essentially need to the application at the state level. Why? What is going on? I guess we'll find out. It'll tell me what the error is. It doesn't like that JSX expression. Maybe it needs to... Okay, I think I need to do something like this. It's not liking the fact that I'm not returning a single child. I think that's the error. Yep, there we go. State is not defined. No undefined. Data is not defined. Why isn't it just bound? Oh, props aren't data. Okay. This dot props dot data. This dot state. That's where I'm making my mistakes. Okay. All right, there we go. Boom. Like, our toggle is perfect example of setting something in component state and doing this combo, right? Like, if I add through this all the way up to Redux, like, nowhere, I can't imagine anywhere else in the app needing to know that my list of repo names is visible or not. And I think this is like how you can go about considering what belongs in component state versus what belongs in Redux. Um, and I think it's pretty clear. I think a lot of people make more of it than they really need to, but maybe I'm being a little less than empathetic to them. But you know, use Redux where it makes sense to. If your app is small, you probably don't need something big like this. But if it gets more complex, reach for the tools that help you do the job best. I see a few more questions in here. Kevin Van Gelder, this is Sublime. I'm just using Oceanic Next as a theme, so tricked you there, plumber. I don't like Atom that much. I used it for a while, maybe 8 months or so, but because it's an Electron app, it just ate up the memory on my computer. It might be better now, but my computer only has 8 GB of memory, and there were times it was using 4 GB just to run Atom, and I just couldn't do that anymore. So I went back to Sublime. I've been trying VS Code, but I'm really missing, as silly as it sounds, I'm missing Origami, which is a package in Sublime that allows me to do like all sorts of crazy pane splitting. I don't use it for much, but I've gotten so used to using it that that I can't really live without it at this point. I know that's weird, but we all develop our habits, right? Let's see. Qback says, for what it's worth, the only issue with functional components is they always re-render since they cannot implement should component update whenever parent above it renders. That's that would happen. Yeah, that's true, but you can also make a higher order component that returns a pure component for you if you want. But generally, the truth is, like, don't prematurely optimize your applications. Like you shouldn't be throwing pure components around unless your app is having performance issues. That's my opinion. I know it's also shared by Ryan Florence. But that's my 2 cents. You're probably doing more work than you need to at that case, but wait till you hit a problem and then like solve it with should component update. I mean, especially now that we have React Fiber, that's it's just I don't know what you're doing. Maybe what you're doing actually is a performance bottleneck and you really need it. So in that case, by that point, when you recognize it's a performance bottleneck, you probably already have started to become aware of the solution. So I think it would make sense to do what you're saying. But I like to keep my React apps. I try to keep them as simple as I can. Applications in general. It doesn't have to be React. I try and be a simple person. So, all right. It is past 10 o'clock. I need to feed my cats. I need to drink some more water, and I need to say good night and spend some time with my wife for the rest of the evening. I want to thank all of you so much for hanging out on the stream with me. I'm really enjoying doing this every week. Let me look at my calendar really quick so that I can. I'm going to open a new window. I don't want you to see my calendar actually, but I'm going to open it up. I think I know what day next week I'm going to be streaming. I kind of alternate between days right now. Looks like next week I will be streaming on Tuesday, November 7th. We'll do the same time, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Pacific. So I will see you then. And as always, find me on Twitter and feel free to send me tweets or DMs. I'm Kyle Shevlin. And thank you so much. Once again, you guys, all of you are the best. And you make this so much fun for me to do. And I really appreciate it. Have a good night. And I'll see you again.